Unity.
The unity,
Yes.
that's right. Not
And
division.
You do not know how much that smacked me in the face. Because it just did. I mean, well, never mind.
Well, unity is always a good message for us to hear in the
I
kingdom
know.
of God, I feel like. So. And sometimes we do make divisions in the church over very arbitrary things.
Well, I've been treated like a stepchild because I'm not Catholic,
Yeah.
you know, and so there's sometimes things they do that kind of hurt my feelings, and I just think, okay, maybe I'm a better Christian. You know, I'm just thinking, I wouldn't do that to anybody. But
Yeah.
it's my job, so I do it.
Well, I growing up in Cincinnati, where we have more Catholics than people, it's I kind of know what you're talking about.
Well, my principal was raised in Cincinnati.
Oh.
She lives in Batesville.
Okay.
But
Batesville's kind of a commuter town for Cincinnati
Yes.
anymore.
we lived there for a
So.
year and a half. About
All right, let's go ahead and talk about
Yes.
Jesus in regards to the Gospel of John, rather than the Catholics or the Methodists, or the Restoration Church, which I like to call the right church. So.
Oh, I already got it out. I need to silence my phone so it doesn't get any. Nobody ever calls me back.
So I had a doctor's appointment today, this afternoon, and my doctor's in Noblesville, so I didn't get an opportunity to make slides for today.
Uh-oh.
But
Well, that's okay. I've been
I was-
doing data all day, so I didn't get my homework done either.
so oh yeah, that's right. We had
Yeah,
homework.
we had homework and I didn't do it.
And so, but if you've been paying attention, my slides are pretty bare. They just kind of follow the class lecture thing. Does somebody have the lesson from last week?
Here.
Because I apparently don't, unless, no, this is the IAMs. Because you guys are supposed to work through and figure out which one you thought was the best seventh sign, right? And then maybe talk about why.
And I'll bet you Tim Martin didn't do it either.
Well,
He
gosh.
hasn't even reading the Gospel of John. I'm just throwing it
I
out
was
there.
going to say, man, you were like telling on him.
Well, I'm saying.
All right, so.
Be a better student.
Of the list of the signs there on the paper, I think I gave like
Yes.
6, 7, 8, or 9, or 10 options. 9 options. Oh yeah, okay. I can
Yeah.
just look off of yours. So please tell me all. Let's go through the room, and if you have an answer, go ahead and share it. If you didn't prepare, I'm sure you can still have an opinion on the subject. So, what are some? So we talked about 6 signs last week, and the 7th is kind of MIA. At least we're not exactly sure what the 7th sign is supposed to be in the Gospel of John, or if there's even supposed to be 7 signs. So why don't we go through and just kind of talk about what we think the 7th sign might be, if there is such a thing.
Well, I based it off of your little markers. So
Yeah.
it would have to be a public work of Jesus.
Yeah, so public work. Okay.
It had to be explicitly identified.
Explicitly identified.
Which I'm not really sure. I can't remember what that meant.
So implicit means it's implied, essentially. Explicit means it's stated as such.
Okay. All right. And then the last one was it points to God's glory displayed in Jesus.
Points to God's glory in Jesus. Okay, so these are at least the trends that the first 3, or the first 6, the 6 that we can identify. These are the trends that those 6 fit. They all happen in a public setting. They're all stated as being a sign. and they point to God's glory in Jesus. It reveals something about Jesus and God.
So these can't, and none of them can fit number 2 because none of them were identified as miracles. But they could fit 1 and 3.
So you don't think any of the 9 will fit?
Well, no, I think it could, but it's not, it doesn't, I mean, they're miracles because we know they're miracles, but I don't know that they're like, I mean, like some of them, like they say, this is the first miracle that Jesus performed.
Yeah, the first sign that Jesus performed.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but these don't really like outright label it with a statement.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay. So.
but they are all public works and they all point to God's glory
Mm-hmm.
in some ways. The only one I didn't really, I mean, Jesus' clearing of the temple, I was kind of like, I don't know what that.
There's not like any miracle attached to that.
No, I mean,
Something that anybody could have done that if they were. I mean,
if
do
they
you
were-
know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. This is going to be fun.
I mean, he was righteously angry.
Yes.
So I agree with what he did, but that didn't really show God's glory. It just
It's not
shows
making somebody
God's
come alive again.
like he was mad at the injustice that was going on to his church.
Okay.
So I didn't really think it was a miracle or a sign.
Or a
I
sign.
don't know. Or sign, I don't know.
What's the difference between a sign and a miracle?
So
Did you
all.
answer that?
The fish would be a miracle,
There you go.
and the
The fish. Oh yeah, yeah, and
walking on the water
Yeah.
is undeniably a miracle.
so we got the fish catch, the walking on water. It's down by the river, walking on water. Any Tombstone fans?
Mm-hmm.
I've never seen it.
Oh.
People talk about it.
Oh my gosh.
I'm not a movie
You would
guy.
love this movie. You need to see Tombstone. I don't endorse any of the bad things that are in it, but
Yeah, there's a lot of bad stuff.
it's something that you need to see. Walking on water, and that's something that Doc Holliday says, Val Kilmer, in regards to Wyatt Earp. He's down by the river, walking on water.
I didn't go to the depth and think about it like she did. And I put down Jesus's word regarding the serpent in the wilderness because of the
Raising up.
by what happened with the brazen serpent
Mm-hmm.
and pointing forward, and it is in itself a miracle with what the people did and by looking, but then I took it forward to what it meant in connection with the crucifixion and to look to Christ. It's not our physical life but our spiritual life where we gain the life. For those people back whenever Moses made a serpent on the pole, it saved their lives
Mm-hmm.
physically,
Mm-hmm.
but with us it saves our lives spiritually and is identifiable looking back and then pointing forward.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I think that's a pretty good argument. I don't know that there will be any wrong answers. Like there's no wrong. So it's because it is disputed. I will tell you what the most common seventh sign is, even though they're wrong. But just kidding. That was a joke.
I'm sorry, I'm just doing something else.
it's kind of like saying they're entitled to their opinions even though they're wrong.
Yeah. All right. So these are the 3 that we have on here. Anybody else want to share, chime in, any of the options?
If I had to pick one, I would have said the resurrection.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's not something that can be.
I thought
And
about
also
that.
his
I thought about
appearances
that
after the
first.
resurrection, those
Yeah,
are pretty,
those are big ones.
yeah.
I mean, he was dead and now he's alive.
Yeah.
And he appeared to,
Yes.
to the public, and it showed God's glory, and just, it fits everything.
And I thought about that first, but then I looked at this and I thought, but anyway.
Do you have an opinion you'd like to share?
I wasn't here last weekend.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. Yeah.
I was at the Young Life banquet last.
Yeah, I apologize. I forgot about that.
That's all right.
All right. So, yeah, these are all good options. The resurrection is kind of a big thing. Jesus coming back from the dead. Not everybody does
Not
that.
everybody gets it.
Right.
So, but it's not exactly stated as a sign,
True.
right? It's also not necessarily performed publicly. He kind of comes back on his own, and then the women come, and then, we're kind of splitting hairs at this point, really. So the Jesus with the snake in wilderness, I don't really have any issue with that other than sort of the same issues. Like it was more of a teaching really than a sign, because there was no physical action unless you do what you did, which is you attach the Old Testament miracle to the cross and resurrection of Christ, or the death of Christ, because he was raised up on the cross. So you're kind of like reaching for that. Walking on water, this is generally considered the seventh sign of the Gospel of John. Problem with the walking on water is it's not public. You could make the argument that they noticed that Jesus was on the other side of the lake and they knew he didn't get in the boat, right? Because they make that little commentary when he comes back, or like the next day or something. And it's kind of reserved for the 12. As far as the miraculous fish go, again, it's not public. These are all kind of
The fish aren't public?
the
Fishermen.
just to the people on the boat.
Oh, we're not talking about the loaves and the fish.
No, this is the
Okay.
miraculous catch in
I see.
at
When
the
you
end
tell
of the
them to put
gospel.
Their nets on the other side.
But I guess with that though is, why is the water into wine considered one when that was only the servants that saw it?
And I think that is a legitimate case to bring to it. So, the only thing I could think of is that it's outside of his posse, right? So, but other than that, you're right. It's kind of becoming less solid of a stance. My personal opinion, which is funny because against everything you guys said, is the temple, the clearing of the temple.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Let's hear it.
Explain that. I want to hear that.
Okay. Now, there's a couple things that you have to work through in order to get to the clearing of the temple as the seventh sign. First of all, the first sign is the water into wine, which happens in Cana. All right. And then you go into chapter 4, right, when the second sign occurs.
The nobleman's son.
Correct. The nobleman's son. There in chapter 4, verse. Yeah, this is again a. She is. This is again a second sign that Jesus performed when he had come out of Judea into Galilee. So the first sign is named, the second sign is named, and yet you have the clearing of the temple right in the middle of those two. So in my initial thoughts, okay, John's counting the first two signs. He doesn't count any of the ones after that. That is clearly probably marking out the clearing of the temple. But then I read some things, and they made the comment that he's counting the signs or the miracles that happened in Cana. This is the first miracle that happened in Cana. This is the second sign that happened in Cana, and it's not counting the signs per se of the gospel. And so this one obviously happening in Jerusalem. So that was the hurdle number one that I had to hop over, and it took me a day or two to really kind of feel, but I obviously got there. So then the other issue is that there's no miracle, right? There's no miracle in the clearing of the temple, and this other guy who wrote a really long commentary on it said that signs don't have to have a miracle attached to it. I don't really buy that argument because all the other ones do.
Yeah.
Why would this one be different? But he made the case that the Old Testament prophets didn't need to perform miracles in order to have a sign, which is something you're revealing something. Right? That's the main point of the sign, is to attach spiritual meaning to something that is physical. And so I didn't really accept that argument. However, I did kind of do what Bob did, right? So in the cleansing of the temple, let's just go ahead and it's pretty short. We'll just read through it. The Passover of the Jews was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem, and he found in the temple those who were selling oxen and sheep and doves and the money and changers seated at their tables, and he made a scourge of cords and drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen, and he poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And to those who were selling the doves he said, "Take these things away. Stop making my Father's house a place of business." His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." The Jews then said to him, "What sign do you show us as your authority for doing these things?" So here we go. We can start getting into the issue of signs, right? Jesus answered, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will rise it up." The Jews then said, "It took 46 years to build this temple. And will you rise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking of the temple of his body. So when he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he said this, and they believed the scriptures and the word which Jesus had spoken. Now when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover during the feast, many believed in his name, observing his signs which he was doing. So, okay. There's enough sign language in there for me to be comfortable associating with the gospel, saying it's a sign. They ask for a sign. The cleansing of the temple is more, well, I actually like to call it the judgment of the temple. All right, so he's passing judgment on the temple and what's being done there. Is the miracle itself is the death and resurrection of Christ, which he attaches to it in the scripture.
Right.
And so you kind of have to go to the other side of the book and pull it back into because that's what the disciples, it says they remembered that he said this, and so that's where I would go for the miraculous part of the sign. But then he's also revealing something about God in Jesus, right? So he is saying that he is now the temple, right? And it's revealing something about Jesus, and that is giving glory to God. So in my book, it was of course very public.
Very public.
All right, explicitly identified. I think we're on shaky ground, but there's enough there for me to dance my feet and feel comfortable. And then points to God's glory in Jesus, and I think we're okay there. And the miracle would then be attached to the death and resurrection.
Well, but it is explicitly identified.
Well, yeah, I think so. Like,
'Cause he tells us.
like, what sign do you show us as your authority for doing these things, right? So there, the people are somehow associating Jesus' actions, but they're wanting more, right? And so the sign that he attaches to what he's doing is destroy this temple in 3 days. I will raise it up. And then in verse 23, his name observing. Many believed in his name, observing his signs which he was doing. So, this could be listed in the things that he was doing in Jerusalem. That were many signs. So that's why I kind of ended up with the clearing of the temple. This is not the only time where, in one of the other signs, the fact that it is a sign isn't identified until 2 chapters later. So that made me kind of feel comfortable that not all the stuff has to happen on the page itself. The miracle could happen way over here, or it could. So this is the one that I would pick if I had to pick a 7th sign. So at least that's my opinion. We can disagree and still shake hands.
Well, I guess the part that made me be agreeable was that it fulfilled a prophecy.
Mm-hmm.
Because the disciples remembered what was written, and so it wasn't just a event. It was the fulfillment of prophecy. Where was walking on water a fulfillment of prophecy, or was that just an event?
Well, I would say it's probably just an event because it's demonstrating Jesus' power over his transcendence over creation. But it's not really I don't think anywhere in the Old Testament it says the Son of Man will dance upon the waters, or something like that. So at least it'd be cool if it did. But so the walking on the water is a really interesting and really cool thing to study and get down into, but unfortunately I don't think it really qualifies as a sign. All right, so that's all. That's probably more time than we really can commit to last week's lesson. Let's actually talk about this week's lesson in our final hour together. And I say this every week. I really don't know that this is going to take that long to get through. And then every week, we go over 10, 15 minutes. So.
I'm leaving at 8. I have this data stuff.
No, I understand. That's fine.
I'm gonna leave.
So, and I haven't seen my kids yet today, so I like you all, but I like them a lot better. So, all right. So, what is a metaphor?
Oh.
Something used to represent something else.
Yeah. Okay. So it's something that
I always get metaphors and similes mixed up. I have to
brings
always check to see so I don't mislead my children.
a comparison the comparison to two things. Okay, so it uses without using the words like or as.
That's a simile, isn't it?
I thought similes used like or as.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, I'm saying without. So a metaphor is comparison of two things without using like or as.
Right.
Okay, so a comparison of two things without using the words like or as. What are the mechanics of a metaphor? All right, so you've Greg, have already kind of honed in on this thing, right? So if we want to compare, X and Y, we have to somehow do that. So in the example on the page there, X equals Y. Now, when we break this down into language, instead of making it a math equation, we have to use something other than like or as to make the comparison of the two. So the example there is that this job is hell. All right, or whatever. So the is the equal sign. The X would be the job. and the y is hell. So there is an equal factor here. So the job equals hell. Hell equals the job. Okay?
One and the same.
Yeah, one in the same. So metaphors are designed to replace the values, ideas, or emotions of the referent with a new set of values, ideas, and emotions. Okay? So everything that you thought about hell, all the bad stuff, burning, fire, darkness, torment, gnashing of teeth, immense smell of sulfur, all of that, all of those ideas and illustrations and whatnot are then associated with this job. Right? So all the bad stuff that we know about hell.
Yeah, but it's really not.
Well, it's...
Because if you experience the one, you'd take your job.
Well, yeah, but the point of language and metaphors is to express some sort of idea.
Yeah.
Right? So, in and of itself, it's kind of, what's the word? An exaggeration, right?
Yeah.
So, you've got fire, right? And you've got teeth, gnashing, right? Okay. And, you've got complete darkness, okay, and cries of the wicked, So anyways, all of those imagery ideas then kind of are supposed to be transferred over to the job. All right. So when I think of my job, not my job. I love my job. Okay. All right. So.
That's good to hear.
Yeah. So.
I do know some people that don't.
Yeah. Well, this is just a common expression, right? So, so when I think of my job, it's miserable. It's awful. It's the worst thing I could think of doing or want to do or something like that. So, to kind of just pounding out this idea as much as I can, the point of a metaphor is to bring all of the value of one part to the other. All right.
Jump the fence into it being a hyperbole.
Yes. That was the word I was trying to think of, by the way. Right? So it's hyperbolic. We can conjugate it, right? So it's a hyperbole, which is an exaggeration to make a point, right? And so that's not all metaphors, I would say, go this far, right? But a lot of them do, and that's what these I am statements are. Okay, so these I am statements are metaphors. Another example there is you Pharisees are whitewashed tombs. So everything that people imagined or thought about whitewashed tombs is then that value, that weight, or those expressions are all then on the shoulders of the Pharisees. However, Jesus and more than likely John, laboring the point, seem to be saying something even more, though. Jesus uses a fairly common word construct tied to a self-identity revelation in order to reveal to his disciples who he truly is. Okay, so we all know that I am, right, is the... we've all heard of these statements before, the 7 I am statements. Is this new to anybody? Okay, so...
I don't remember what they all are, but I know.
That's what I was thinking, just what you said, but I know what
Yeah.
they mean.
Yeah, okay, so we'll go over all of them this evening. So, I am the vine, or I am the way, the truth, and the life, right?
The
So,
light of the world.
yeah, so these are all I am statements that are pretty important because of the Greek construct that John uses. All right, so ego, eimi, lego my ego,
Yeah.
right? right, so this is kind of what this looks like in Greek. And these words are essentially the same. They basically have the same meaning. Like I, it's I, me, exist, existence, myself. Like, so they all kind of have the same understanding. Where it gets truly interesting is when we look to the Old Testament, right? So in Exodus chapter 3, verse 14, 3:14. If we were to open our Bibles there, except it's also right here in front of you, Exodus 3:14, and God spoke to Moses saying, so because Moses asks, who should I say sent me? Right? And God responds, and God spoke to Moses saying, I am, ego eimi, and he said, say this to the children of Israel, I am has sent me to you. Okay. Now, you all are looking at me like, I thought that was Yahweh. Right? That's where we get, I thought that was Hebrew. Right? It's the book of Exodus. Exodus is the Old Testament. Old Testament is written in Hebrew. There is no Greek yet. So how do we get this ego eimi here in 3:14? Are you all trekking with me?
So far.
All right. Good. So the name of God is fill in the blank. Yahweh. Yeah. All right. So
YHWH.
yeah. So YHWH. Okay. This is the name of God. And anybody know why we pronounce it Yahweh?
Because we don't know how to do it any other way.
I just read it here and I can't. It has something to do with the scribes and whenever they would.
Is it more or less transliterated rather than translated?
Yeah. All right. So Hebrew has no vowels. I don't know if you knew that or not, but
No, I didn't.
so they don't have A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y.
Yeah.
All right. They only had consonants, and we have since gone back and added the vowels so that we can pronounce the words. And we honestly don't know how to pronounce YHWH. Okay? We don't. We added in the A and the E because we think that makes sense with the consonants that are there.
But whenever the scribes were writing this, they would not say, if I'm remembering, they would not use the name God. They used YHWH, and it was difficult to understand even what it meant.
Yeah, so
Am I thinking right?
kind of.
They would not say.
Yeah, they wouldn't pronounce the name of God.
Right. So they wrote it YHWH, but would not pronounce it. But I can't remember. I read it in the last few weeks. But
Yeah. Okay. So with
it's
Yahweh,
irrelevant.
with Yahweh, right? We say it now, but you're right. Like they would not. And when they came to it, and if they were to write this name, they would stop what they were doing, put down their pen. They would go and wash their hands, and then they would return to their seats. They would take out a new quill, and it would be dipped in melted gold, and they would write the name of God. And then they would put down that pen, go back and wash their hands, pick up the regular quill, and continue on writing. Now, Yahweh appears a lot, right? Especially in the Torah. So that was a pretty.
There was a lot of hand washing going on.
Exactly.
Wasn't there?
Right? I hope they had dove.
Yeah.
Otherwise they're getting some.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So, anyways, this is a pretty important name, and so have we all heard the name Jehovah?
Uh-huh.
Okay, Jehovah is spelled Jehova. H. Okay. So we see the J, the H, the V, and the H. So when Yahweh gets taken into Latin, the Y becomes a J, the W becomes a V. Thank you, Catholics, for Jehovah. Okay. Now, where do they get all these vowels from?
They make them up.
Yep.
It could have been Jehovah.
Actually, no. I'm sorry. It's A, J-A-H. Right?
Jehovah.
Yeah. Somebody look that up real quick.
What's J-E?
Yeah, I thought it is J-E.
It is.
Why did they not put a vowel in Yahweh in between the H and the W? Why isn't it Yah?
Nobody knows.
Anyway.
I once heard a preacher, and you always have to be careful when you hear things from preachers, because sometimes things preach well, right? And that's especially true with the person I heard it from. So it could be completely bogus, but I'll share it with you anyways. Is that the phrase Yahweh is the sound of a breath. So anytime you breathe, you're taking in God, exhaling Yahweh. So it breaks it into like a.
Have the hiccups and then it's
So they essentially borrowed these vowels from another word and inserted them into the YHWH, and they got Jehovah. All right, so I don't know how to tell you this, but Jehovah is not in the Bible. Nowhere in the Bible is the name Jehovah.
Really?
Really.
What is Jehovah Jireh?
It's Yahweh.
Oh, okay.
So Jehovah is a name that was made up about 1,000 years after the time of Christ. So, because they didn't want to say Yahweh out of respect for the name. So,
Giving him another name.
I don't know if you
pretty
So
disrespectful.
Jehovah Witness.
yeah. I hate to break it to you, buddy.
For who you are doesn't even sincere.
So I forget which word. I thought it was Adonai that they took the vowels from and they inserted it into Yahweh. But I could be very wrong about that. So, anyways, what does all this have to do with the I ams? Okay. Well,
because it's his name.
yeah. So it's Yahweh means I am that I am. It's probably the best way. And that's all that I am. I'm Popeye the Sailor Man. Doot, doot. Right? So, you didn't know Popeye stole it from God.
Yeah.
So, Yahweh means something like I am that I am. Ego eimi is essentially the same thing. It's saying I am that I am, because these two words are essentially the same. All right. When in the BC era of the timeline, around between 200 and 100 BC, they commissioned the Old Testament be translated into Greek. We call this the Greek Septuagint. All right, and it's represented by the letters LXX, which is the Roman numerals for 70. Septuagint, sept, 70, right? So that's supposedly they had 70 translators, and it's this really bizarre story. But anyways, when they translated the Old Testament into Greek, they chose the Greek ego eimi for this Exodus 3:14 passage to use for the name of God. So when we get to the Gospel of John and we see a pattern of ego eimi and then some sort of qualifier like a metaphor, there should be a light bulb that goes off on our head, because Jesus is taking the name of God and attributing then a descriptor to it. I am the vine, something like that. So he's taking on the name of God for himself. And then this gets him into a lot of trouble.
I think he's a blasphemer.
Exactly. And there are 7 I am statements when he uses some sort of metaphoric expression following. Then there are 7 I am statements where he doesn't. He just ends at I am. And we'll look at a couple of those if we have time as well. So, John, the very bottom of page 27, those lists, John 4:26, 6:20, 8:24, 8:28, 8:58, 13:19, and 18:5. All of these references are the references where there is not something that comes after it. Those are all the examples of when he just takes I am. And sometimes in our Bibles, because the New Testament translators into English or whatever want to kind of smooth out the whole ego, eimi thing. And so they'll add like I am he or I am him, something like that. But the he or the him is not necessarily in the Greek, although it is technically okay to translate it I am he. So, all right. So page 28. Read the following I am statements found in these passages and write the subsequent description that follows I am the blank. Read each corresponding cross-reference in Scripture. These are not exactly direct references by Christ to these passages. Rather, these may be considered thematic references to further our understanding of what Jesus' point in these statements might be. So, why don't we kind of go through the room, and we'll start over with Greg. And Greg, if you could take the first one, so like line 1, so that would be 6, 35, 48, and 51. Tim, if you want to do line 2, Amy, line 3, Jenny, line 4, Belinda, line 5, Bob, line 6, and I'll take line 7.
These are the John verses that correspond.
Yep.
But on my paper here, it doesn't have a cross-reference. It just has the...
Yeah, that's because I couldn't find one.
Okay.
What number was that?
Maybe.
You're
5.
We're looking up the actual passages right now. So, do you have the first one?
6:35 reads, Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will not hunger, and he who believes in me will not thirst. And then 48 of John 6 reads, I am the bread of life. Period. 51 reads, I am the living bread that came down out of heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. And the bread also, which I will give for the life of the world, is my flesh.
Okay, thank you. Number 2.
8:12. Then Jesus again spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in the darkness, but will have the light of life.
Line 3.
Therefore Jesus said again, very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. That's 7 and 9.
Okay. Number 4.
10, 11, and 14 is, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me.
Okay. Number 5.
Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live, even though he dies. And that's 25. I'm the resurrection.
And the life.
And the life.
Bob?
Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me.
Okay, and then number 7 is, I am the true vine. You are the branches. All right. So these are our 7 I am statements where there is something that follows it to kind of give a further revelation of who Jesus is. Now, let's go back and we'll just take the same lines that we had. And maybe, I don't know that we have time to read all of these cross-references because there's a couple of them for some, but why don't we start with the Exodus 16, 4 through 5. And this goes, and when I say cross-reference, make sure you understand that this is not necessarily something that Jesus is directly quoting, but it might be a thematic reference that pops up, right? So this is something that Jesus is saying that could refer, like it falls in line.
Exodus 16:4-5 reads, Then the Lord said to Moses, Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a daily portion every day, that I may test them whether or not they will walk in my instruction. On the 6th day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather daily.
Okay, this is probably actually one where Jesus is directly referencing this particular passage. I think Jesus, especially, we'll look at it, but it's happening in the realm of the feeding of the 5,000. So the bread from heaven is, I believe, a direct, like he's directly referencing that he is like the manna that was in the wilderness. All right, the light of the world.
49:6. He says, It is too small a thing that you should be my... Is that it? 49? Isaiah 49:6?
Yeah.
Okay. He says, It is too small a thing that you should be my servant, to raise up the tribes of Jacob and to restore the preserved ones of Israel. I will also make you a light of the nations, so that my salvation may reach to the end of the earth.
So a light to the nations, right? Or the Gentiles, depending on what translation you have. 3.
To go out and come in before them, one who will lead them out and bring them in, so the Lord's people will not be like sheep without a shepherd.
Okay, so the going out and the coming in, right? That's the
I didn't look up the other two.
They say the same thing,
Okay.
essentially. And where was that at again? Numbers? Yeah.
Verse 27:17.
If you could look up 28:6 real quick, we'll move on to the next one while you.
That's Deuteronomy.
Yeah, Deuteronomy 28:6.
I can do that.
Jenny, if you want to go ahead with yours while she looks that up.
Okay, Ezekiel is, the word of the Lord came to me, son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel, prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says, woe to the shepherds of Israel who only take care of themselves. Should not shepherds take care of the flock? You eat the curds, clothe yourselves with wool, and slaughter the choice animals, but you do not take care of the flock. You have not strengthened the weak or healed the sick or bound up the injured. You have not brought back the strays or searched for the lost. You ruled them harshly and brutally. So they were scattered because there was no shepherd, and when they were scattered, they became food for all the wild animals. My sheep wandered over all the mountains and on every high hill. They were there scattered over the whole earth, and no one searched or looked for them. Therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. As surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, because my flock...
Okay, that's probably good.
No.
Yeah, 31 verses of that. So you get the idea that those are the bad shepherds, right? So Jesus is the good shepherd. There's a contrast there. Yeah, so you had Deuteronomy.
You will be blessed when you come in and blessed when you go out.
Yeah, so there's a blessing. And the going out and the coming in is obviously an allusion to like a gate, like even a swinging gate. You know, you could see, and the sheep going out and then the sheep coming back in. And so that's kind of those were the only references I could find to that kind of thing. So
the resurrection and the life is Ezekiel. That's all. The whole chapter, first part of it's about the dry bones coming back to life.
Yeah.
verse 14 says, I will put my spirit in you and you will live. So that's kind of a key verse.
Mm-hmm.
And it's bringing life out of death. Dry bones, making them live again. And then Hosea is the same thing, only he's saying he has been torn us to pieces and he will heal us. He'll bind up our wounds. After 2 days he will revive us. On the third day he will restore us.
And you didn't have one, right? Because I couldn't find. All right, so in the way, the truth, and the life is such a broad, I mean, that's clearly an Old Testament thing, but we'd be like reading the whole thing, right? So I think we can all agree, like, we could talk about Psalm 119 comes to mind. You follow his precepts and you will live. That kind of statements, right? The truth, his word is truth. And so those things are all throughout the Old Testament.
For that, it doesn't give it. I tried to look for Old Testament, but it just
it doesn't
makes reference to the Christ being the life, a mediator, and the door through this, but there's no Old Testament reference.
Yeah, most of these actually won't have an Old Testament reference. So I had to do some. I mean, some of them were kind of easy, but some of them were not. So, and then the last one, I am the true vine. I don't have it. Somebody. I can flip to it real quick.
Isaiah.
So I'll take Psalm 80.
Hear, O my people, and I will warn you, if you would but listen to me, O Israel, you shall have no foreign God among you, you shall not bow down to an alien God. I am the Lord your God, who brought you up out of Egypt. Open wide your mouth, and I will fill it.
What are you reading?
Psalm. Oh, no, I'm not.
Yeah.
All right, so 80.
Isaiah.
Psalm 88 through 11. You removed a vine from Egypt. You drove out the nations and planted it. You cleared the ground before it, and it took deep root and filled the land. The mountains were covered with its shadow, and the cedars of God with its boughs. It was sending out its branches to the sea and its shoots to the river. So you kind of get this imagery of Israel being this vine that was ripped out of Egypt and then planted in Canaan, and it's flourishing there, and it's growing and consuming and taking over everything. So